2009, stating, "We believe that the best antidote to offensive and hateful speech is constructive dialogue that counters such arguments. The freedom of the press does not face any threats either, as the President's inherent power to prohibit the disclosure of classified documents concerning sensitive materials protects national security."
The panel agrees that the right to privacy is not being jeopardized in modern society, actually feeling that parts of our right to privacy should be given up for the good of the whole. Many Americans disagree with the panel's thought on this, according to Pew Research, which shows that 79% of adults are very or somewhat concerned about how companies are using their data, while 64% display the same level of concern about government data collection.
American citizens also have the protection from businesses. Media platforms such as Facebook has terms of service, which is a legally binding agreement between the user and the company that sets the guidelines and rules. Within these terms is information about the user's privacy and how the data that is collected will be used.
The right to privacy was not established until 1965, with the Supreme Court case Griswold v. Connecticut, where the state of Connecticut made a law banning contraceptives. The court ruled that the Constitution did in fact protect the right of marital privacy against state restrictions on contraception. With this, the court also stated, according to 13.org, the spirit of the First, Third, Fourth, Fifth, and Ninth Amendments, as applied against the states by the 14th Amendment, creates a general right to privacy that cannot be duly infringed.
This decision has since faced controversy in the recent years following the attack of 9/11 and the sign of the Patriot Act. One can see this in Apple v. FBI, where the FBI wanted a master key to citizens' private data after struggling to obtain content on a suspected terrorist. The court decided that the FBI cannot freely obtain this content, but could in fact access it with the proper warrants.
One can also see this in Stanley v. Georgia, 1969, where Stanley was caught with pornographic materials and later arrested. The Supreme Court held that the First and Fifth Amendment goes against making possession of obscene materials a crime, with Justice Thurgood Marshall stating, "If the First Amendment means anything, it means that a state has no business telling a man what books he may read or films he may watch. Our whole constitutional heritage rebels at the thought of giving the government the power to control men's minds." We are ready for your questions.
Thank you very much for that. Let me remind you to put your notes away. And so a lot of your opening statement was about the various protections, constitutional and otherwise, that we have from governments snooping into our private affairs. But those constitutional provisions don't restrict the power of private entities. So what, if any, protections are there from the snooping of Facebook, Microsoft, and companies that maybe we've never even heard of?
So there are hardly no protections at the moment, but there is protections that are trying to be passed in California that I know of, where there are people who want to use Facebook and they want to be able to use all these platforms that collect their data. They want to be able to use that and still say, I don't want you to collect my data at all, but I still want to use this. Because within the terms of agreement, it will tell you how they're going to collect your data and how they're going to use it. But there are many Americans who say, I don't want this, but at the same time, it's either you say we can collect your data, we can do all this, or you don't use the app at all. So there is laws that are trying to be passed that says you can say, I don't want my data collected, and you can still use that platform.
Would you be in favor of that? I mean, you can hardly say that Facebook is essential, right? I mean, you could get along, I guess, fine without Facebook, right?
So I personally feel that it is essential for those who do not want these companies to collect their data. Personally, I don't necessarily have a problem with it in the full scope of things. It is kind of weird seeing how, if I'm looking something up on Amazon, how I'll get ads for this same thing on Facebook. So how these companies will sell my data. But there's people who don't like that. So that's why I feel like these laws are necessary for those people who want to use these platforms. They're not essential platforms. You don't have to use them. But for those people who want to, especially since technology is so big and social media is so big in today's society, even now, since everyone has to use social distancing and isolation, how this is an easier way for us to communicate, but people don't want these companies to be able to snoop into their profiles and their personal data. So that's why I feel like these laws are necessary for those who do not want their data collected.
I also feel like these laws are necessary because typically we would look towards the CATS test established in CATS of the United States in 1964, which determines if an individual's right to privacy has been violated. But with recent technological advancements, it's sort of collapsed the two parts to this CATS test. The first part is to determine if the individual expects the right to privacy towards whatever they want to be protected. But this is collapsed by the third-party doctrine, which states that any information given to third parties cannot be expected to be kept private, and the individual has no expectation of privacy. The second rule, which states that if society is ready to hear this as a right protected by privacy, but this is also collapsed as, according to a Georgetown article, society actually accepts diminished privacy as a trade-off to more convenience with technology.
Thank you very much. I'm going to turn now to the current situation, epidemic COVID-19, and the idea of how should courts analyze and treat the situation, for example, contact tracing and the ability for, in the name of the public good and public safety, for the government to be able to track our movements, track who we've talked to, all of these very, private situations and things that we would generally like to keep private. How should courts analyze that sort of public safety perspective versus the individual's privacy rights?
So I personally feel like where our country has never really gone through a huge pandemic like COVID, everything is so new. But I personally feel like if someone has tested positive for the COVID, then they should trace only their information, who they've come in contact with. And like I said, this is so new, it's very hard to have a definite answer. So to protect the privacy of everyone, I feel like you should only track those people who have tested positive and then contact the people that they've been in contact with and say you might want to get tested.
As we had stated in our opening 4 minutes, that the panel feels that parts of our rights to privacy should be given up for the common good of the whole. So we can see both sides of this argument, where we feel, and I personally feel, that this contact tracing isn't a big deal, especially since it's going to influence the common good of the whole. But we can see where other people don't like this, because as James Madison has stated, if all men were angels, no government would be needed. So
I want to see if we can get Caitlin's last question.
Yeah, can Apple send all of our GPS phone data to law enforcement, who can use it to see if everyone's maintaining 6 feet of social distancing and ticket us if we're not?
So as we stated in our opening 4 minutes, there was a case of the Apple versus FBI. And within that case, Apple refused to just hand over their users' information. And they later said after the case was over that we're not going to stop helping police get
this information.
Yeah. But they will hand it over if the FBI did come with the proper warrants.
There are also other companies such as Facebook and...
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, though.
Sorry about that. We got to stop you. Boy, would love to hear you go on. I mean, this has been very interesting. I'm sorry we hardly scratched the surface. And I have a lot of questions that I would have loved to ask you, which is, quite frankly, the leading indicator for me of a really good argument, how thought-provoking and provocative it is, and you guys get great marks on that. So we'll give you just a little bit of feedback. Let me sort of again repeat. Wow, this is actually remarkable that we and you guys were able to put all of this together, and it looks great. I mean, I have no idea what's been going on behind the scenes, but you should just know it looks great, it sounds great, and you guys really, really impressive. So I thought lots of really good sort of supporting data, and the Pew Research, we brought the "If Men Were Angels" quote in at the end there, which was a very nice pivot to to that, that we hear that a lot in like a Unit 2 or something, but bringing it into Unit 5 is very cool, very clever. I would have liked, there's something called the silver doctrine, silver platter doctrine, where if a private entity gives the government something, it's not ordinarily subject to the Fourth Amendment, but since the third party doctrine is now in play as a result of Carpenter, sort of all of these issues and doctrines are up in the air. And I just was given so much food for thought in your presentation that it was just really, really, really impressive, really good.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot, and it was I particularly enjoyed some of the discussion about some of the standards and tests that have been used, with the idea of, are they still as robust and protective of where we are now? Everything always evolves, and certainly technology is a big driver of evolution pretty quickly in some circumstances, certainly now. And Jaden, your discussion of CATS and the sort of collapsing, as you phrased it, I thought was very interesting, and the ability of courts to adapt and change in how they analyze these things. And what we're going through now will be certainly a big event in our country's history in a lot of ways, and certainly in our jurisprudence and how we move forward with various protections. And I wish we had a lot more time, but thank you so much for giving us the time that you have, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, I agree, Jaden. You're pulling in CATS in the follow-up. We always like to see kind of new material that wasn't covered in the prepared remarks brought into follow-up questions, because it shows us kind of more of what your preparation looked like, and it's always very impressive when you can kind of call that up. So great job. I too had like 7 other questions that I'd love to talk about with you. I mean, like, what if there's no warrant and Apple just wants to volunteer the GPS data? That they've done this in China, where there's like very serious tracking of individuals, and a lot of people say it's how they got the outbreak under control effectively. And so I think you guys did a good job using survey data. One thing, I believe one of your stats was from 2016, if I heard correctly, and I would challenge you as to whether that is a persuasive statistic to cite 4 years later in terms of public sentiment. But I think the broader looking at kind of what the public sentiment is around these issues is really smart, and the question kind of asks you to do that. And really what we see is the court takes that into account when they consider tricky issues like this. They kind of like to know what, whether the broader public is going to be in line with whatever the decisions they make, or at least some folks would say that the court cares about that. So great job. I enjoyed the discussion, and thank you for your preparation.
Yeah, congratulations to you all. Stay safe, and just keep thinking about this stuff. This is the future of this country. It depends on you guys. It's your world, and it will be what you make of it. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And the judges are going to enter back into their deliberation room. How did you feel it all went?
Good.
Good.
Yeah, I felt good about it. I mean, I really did. You guys, excellent job. I think Jayden already hopped off, but he added CATS test, I think, was critical, but you guys had really good reasoning. So
yeah,
I'm impressed. I'm telling you, it's, you want to peak at the end, and I feel like you guys, it's your best performance. I mean, from top to bottom, congratulations.
you did wonderful.